Welcome to Gardening Australia. You know, there's two places where time stands still for me. Working in the garden and wandering around nurseries. I could spend hours here, but let's get straight into the show and see what's coming up.
I'm at Cochrane-Ng, a beautiful historic home and garden in the Adelaide Hills. Many of the trees are from the 1890s, but more recently, Cochrane-Ng's current owners have put their own stamp on the place.
Filling your garden with new plants doesn't have to cost a lot of money. I'm going to show you how to produce new plants by layering the ones that you already have.
And I'll be visiting a garden that 2 years ago was a featureless lawn. But now, well, I'll let you be the judge.
Good evening, Australia. It's great to be here. Hope you're ready because it's time to rock.
Well, not that sort of rock. What you're looking at is the construction of a most unusual rock garden. It's a garden inspired by the geology of Victoria, featuring a brilliant arrangement of nearly 500 rock specimens collected from every corner of the state, making this living geological map at Monash University's Clayton campus the largest outdoor earth sciences laboratory in the world. James, this is really a most remarkable garden. How did it all come about?
Well, a couple of years ago, the Dean of Science here at Monash University decided that he wanted to bring new concepts into teaching science here at the university, and said, we want to build an outdoor teaching laboratory so our students can start working on it. Rather than go out in the field, they can just come here and get an idea and appreciation of what we're doing as geologists.
So, James, how is the garden laid out?
Well, it's inspired by the geology of Victoria. And we've got about 500 different rocks here, weighing up to 13 tonnes each. And they represent about 13 different areas here in Victoria. Some of the rocks here weigh about 13 or 14 tonnes, so we had to get cranes to bring them in. From right at the beginning of the construction period until we were actually able to open the garden to the public and to our students, it took around about a year, which meant that myself and my colleagues who were working on the garden had to be down here literally every day during that whole process, just to make sure that every one of the rocks with its own orientation and its own position in the garden, every one of those 500 rocks had to be put into the right place.
Now, Julie, you're a volcanologist here at the university.
Yep.
And it's really important, isn't it? The material that comes out of the volcano is what gives us the sorts of soils we grow our plants in.
Yeah, that's right. So the soil composition is very much dependent on the breakdown of these rocks. So these are both volcanic rocks from Western Victoria. This one's a basalt and this one's a scoria.
This is the sort of material I use for scoria paths and occasionally as a mulch.
Yeah, so because it's got lots of bubbles in it, it's very porous. So the water just comes right through it. But also, this one's made mainly of glass, so it doesn't have a lot of crystals in it. And volcanic glass breaks down really, really quickly. And this stuff's made mainly of crystals, and that's very hardy. It takes a long time to break down. So we get very thin soils on this stuff, and maybe thick soils on this stuff, so up to 3 metres of profile sometimes on a scoria cone, which is a big edifice. And it breaks down to clays, which is what you can see here.
And because this is volcanic and because it's been brought up from below the Earth's crust, do I take it that it is rich in minerals?
Very rich in minerals. So this has a red colour because it has a lot of iron content in it. And that iron's really useful for plants because it allows it to make chlorophyll. And they also have a lot of potassium in them and calcium, and those are the things that plants need to grow.
Now, I notice you've got a whole lot of planting coming through here.
Yes.
And I know from my own experience of being in the bush that different plants grow with different geologies.
Oh, absolutely.
So is there a way in which planting here reflects the geology they're growing on?
Absolutely. So the plantings are actually very sympathetic to what we would find those geographical areas. We actually use plants actually in some very unique ways. For instance, we think we've got an area we might find gold. We actually look at the leaves of some plants, and if you microanalyze those and see little bits of gold in there, you can actually say, well, obviously that gold's been incorporated into the root system of that plant, so there must be gold in the rocks beneath. So we use that as an exploration tool for mining.
So is this something I can do at home?
Or you'd have to probably get a few scientists to come in to do some detailed scientific work on those plants.
So it's not likely to be a way I can make myself a fortune?
Unfortunately not, no.
What a blow. Gardens have experienced a considerable resurgence as a teaching tool over the last decade or so. But as far as I know, this is the first one to combine geology with modern ecology. It's a fascinating site, particularly for people who like plants or geology. There's a lot to learn and a lot of information. It's open to the public, so why not rock on down and check it out?
People often want to know what they can grow as an attractive climber over a trellis or a fence that's in a sunny spot and that is drought tolerant. Well, the plant that I would suggest is the native sarsaparilla, Hardenbergia violaceae. This is the Hardenbergia that you see out in the wild. In the bush it grows kind of creeping all over the soil, and it's a beauty. I love the purple sprays of flowers, tiny little pea-shaped flowers that bring the bees in. And that's a beauty. It's called Happy Wanderer. There is another cultivar that's called Free and Easy. It's got pink buds, lovely white sprays, and it lives up to that name, Free and Easy, because it flowers beautifully. Both of them flower in winter and spring. Once they've finished flowering, give them a bit of a trim back because they really like that, and it keeps them from looking woody. They're both vigorous climbers, so they'll need a sturdy support to climb on. But just because they're sold growing up supports, don't think that they are only climbing plants. Hardenbergias also make excellent low-maintenance ground covers. So that's the Hardenbergia violaceae, the Happy Wanderer. And for a tough, no-nonsense plant, that is the one to go for.
This pak choi is only 4 weeks old from seed. And have a look at it. It is just beautiful. Look, I'll pick some for you. There we go. Now, the trick to making sure you've always got plenty of these quick-growing crops on hand is to make sure every time you harvest, you also sow some more. I'm just spreading them along a pre-prepared furrow. I've blended in a bit of fine compost and aged manure, and then just tickle the soil over the top. And you can see what a great use of a narrow strip of bed this is. There we go. Another tip, water in with half-strength liquid kelp and fish emulsion. Keep the soil moist, feed again in a fortnight, and within 4 weeks, you'll be eating the stuff.
If you're a fan of propagating plants, then you'll know that it's a fun and effective way of literally getting more out of your garden. And if you're new to it, then a method called layering is probably the best and the easiest place to get started. Layering is a technique that makes the most of the way a plant naturally forms roots from nodes down its stem. This happens when a part of the plant comes in contact with the ground and takes root. Plants like species geraniums, succulents and climbers will do it naturally. But with a bit of know-how, you can propagate nearly any plant this way. There's a couple of ways of layering plants, but the first method I want to show you is simply where you bury a part of the plant to encourage it to take root. Choose a whippy stem that you can easily bend to ground level. Make sure the stem has a couple of nodes on it. This is where the roots will form. Remove the leaves of the part you're burying. Wound the area slightly with your thumbnail to encourage root development. Then place it on the ground, cover it with a bit of dirt, bury the stem to a depth of 5 to 10 centimetres and secure with something heavy, like a rock. One of the main benefits of this method is the stem is still connected to the parent, so it's still drawing nutrient and photosynthesising. There's no need for hothouses or fancy propagation tools. In 4 to 6 weeks, it'll take root. Then all you have to do is cut it off from the parent, dig it up and replant it where you want it. Another method that's great for larger plants is called aerial layering. It works on woody trees and shrubs, and it's especially good on things like magnolias, rhododendrons and figs. Now for this method, you're gonna need some plastic cling wrap, a sharp knife, some budding tape, some rooting hormone, some sphagnum moss, and a twig about the thickness of a matchstick. Start by selecting a branch that's nice and healthy with a good bit of leaf, preferably with previous season's growth, as this type of wood will form root more easily. Look for a stem a bit thicker than a pencil, and if you need to, strip away the leaves along a 15cm section. Starting near a node, cut into the bark to the green cambium layer. This is where the roots will grow from. Using a stick, paint a bit of the rooting hormone into the slice. This is a synthetic plant hormone that encourages the layer to grow roots quicker. I like to put a little bit of sphagnum moss up into the slice and then use part of the stick to keep the slice open. As the roots develop, they need a moist environment. So I'm laying out a good amount of moistened sphagnum moss onto my plastic and wrapping it around the whole wound. Then simply tie off the ends with some grafting tape or twisty ties and job's done. The roots will take about 8 to 12 weeks to develop, so be patient. And when that happens, all you have to do is cut it off and pot it up. You don't need to spend a fortune to expand your garden. With a little bit of know-how and a little bit of effort, you can really capitalise on the plants that you already have.
I'm at Cochrane-Ng, a beautiful historic home and garden at Crapers West in the Adelaide Hills. The sandstone house dates from the 1890s, and many of the trees that frame the garden are from that time. But more recently, Cochrane-Ng's current owners, Margaret and Michael Randall, have put their own stamp on the place. Wow, a combination of the love of gardening and of travel has fashioned a most remarkable, eclectic garden. So how would you describe this garden?
Well, Sophie, I think it's fair to say that this has got a fairly strong Italianate influence, and you probably notice that other parts of the garden have got influences from other lands.
So your travels have influenced the way that you garden?
Yeah, we pick up ideas from different gardens that we visit overseas.
So what was the history of the house then?
Very interesting. An engineer, Mr. Charles Horn, went to the mines in Burra, made a fortune, and decided to set up his establishment here. Not only was he a good engineer, but he was a good father, or at least managed to do it 13 times. And that explains why the house was slightly bigger than normal.
Originally, it was 27 acres when the house was originally built. Yep. So the house next door used to be the coach house for this house, and the garden extended to over the other side of the road down the bottom of the hill where the vegetable garden and the cow was kept, and there was a tennis court and croquet lawn and huge waterfall apparently.
So this area here has a tropical feel, Margaret.
Well, it's reminiscent of our many visits to Penang and other parts of Southeast Asia, and it's really difficult to have a tropical sort of garden in the hills. But a lot of these plants actually aren't tropical.
They just give that impression?
Yes.
This is a beautiful area.
We love this area. It's so jungly and we can see it from our kitchen. So every morning we look out on this as we're having breakfast.
And you've got an interesting mix of plants in here, but they're obviously all cold tender and look specky.
Yeah, the epiphyllums do really well here and they have such spectacular flowers and they last for a couple of weeks, so we get a current succession of flower.
So this garden is quite steep to get to this point, and I can see it extends further. How much of the garden is beyond this point?
Probably as much as you've seen up to now. As you point out, it's very steep and it's getting steeper, so there's a big, big area down here.
And so how do you get things like a lawnmower down here?
Oh, with great difficulty. But not as difficult as getting them back up again.
What a great combination of plants. It's got a real Mediterranean feel.
And that's what it is, principally Mediterranean, but with influences from Africa, from South America, all to do with the fact that nothing much would grow here, certainly not the lawn, and so these are xerophytic plants that will tolerate the drought.
Have you worked the colours? It looks like there's a bit of a theme happening here.
Well, I'm so glad you noticed that, because we've striven to go from neutral colours, white and grey, through yellows, orange, gold, red, and then finally the cool end of the spectrum, but still contrasting touches.
This section has a real English feel to it with all the beautiful roses.
We love the beautiful soft colours, a very English garden, which we were hoping to create when we first moved here.
These apricot roses are beautiful. Are they apricot nectar?
Yes, and I love that particular one. When I walk around the garden, sometimes I'm amazed at what we've created because it's such a large garden.
And for me, sometimes there's just a slight sense of immortality, that perhaps we've created something that's going to last longer than we're going to last, and that future generations of people might come here and enjoy it and say, well, that wasn't bad at all. They knew a thing or two, and that would be rather nice.
I'm often asked, why do I sow corn so thickly? If you see me doing that, I'm not growing it to form cobs as human food, I'm growing it for leaves to feed to my guinea pigs, or you could feed poultry. Now, to get this seed in good quantities, I go to a produce store or a pet store, and that way I can sow it very thickly, and I carry on thinning the seedlings so I get extended pickings.
When do you cut back the foliage of your flowering bulbs? Well, when jonquils and daffodils finish flowering and the leaves start to go yellow, leave it as long as you can, because those leaves are still putting energy into the underground bulb for next year's flowering. If you think it looks unsightly, just plait them together, just loosely, or just put them down on the ground and they will just gently go off yellow and not look quite so unsightly.
How do you speed up the composting process? Well, many people add nitrogen in the form of blood and bone, comfrey leaves, even coffee grounds. But the best way is to tend your compost bins. If it's too wet, give it a turn. Get a bit of air in there. If it's too dry, add water. Alternatively, if there's too much green, add a bit of brown. And if there's too much brown, add a bit of green.
Who hasn't got a plant in a container? Whether it's a new curry leaf plant like this that needs to be potted up, or whether you need to rejuvenate your plants at home that have been in the same containers for a long time. Well, fear not, because I've got some simple tips and tricks that'll help you to pot up with no fuss or bother. As a basic guide, choose a pot that's about half as big again as the existing pot. So in this case, we've got a 200mm pot that we're potting up into a 300mm pot. And for this little 100mm plant, put that one into a 150mm size. The reason for this is that if it's in too big a container, the roots risk being wet and cold, and it could put the plant in shock. To give the plant a good start, into my potting mix, I'm adding worm castings, compost, eggshells, rock dust, and mixing it all through. Into the base of the new pot, I'm putting in a small amount of my potting mix. Sitting the plant in its existing pot inside the new pot, I'm adding mix and adjusting as I go. Well, I reckon this is just about right. The trunk of the curry leaf plant is right in the centre. It's not to the side like a leaning Tower of Pisa. And height-wise, it's about 25 to 50 mil below the rim of the new pot, so that will hold water and our finished mulch. I'm lifting out the curry plant now, and you can see it's left a perfect mould there. Perfect for potting. Okay, I'll tip the curry plant out of its pot and put it into the mould. Maintenance-wise, this potting mix already has slow-release fertiliser in it, but add some in about 3 months. Do this each season and then apply a weak liquid fertiliser every 2 to 4 weeks. Mulch with whatever you've got. Gravel is great because it directs the water straight into the root system. So no more procrastination on your potting up jobs. This weekend, get out there and start potting up the easy way.
If you've ever doubted the power of plants to transform a place, I've got something you really need to see. These are the real estate photos used to advertise this place a little more than 2 years ago. They show a modest home at Niagara Park on the Central Coast, surrounded by lawn and little else. Now look at the difference a gardener can make. And this is Athol Brooks, retired farmer and nursery owner, and the man responsible for this stunning transformation.
Well, I actually wanted privacy and sort of more low maintenance instead of mowing lawns at a steep decline like this one was. And I just decided a native garden for the front. I'm more of an exotic grower, and I wanted to prove to me that I can grow native plants because everybody says it's easy care. But there's no such thing as easy care, and to get a good garden, you have to look after it.
The garden has grown abundantly in such a short space of time. How did you achieve that?
Well, it is a case of food and water. And plants are like human beings. They have to have the nutrients, they have to have the trace elements, and that it comes from feeding. And that helps compact a lot of diseases and problems you have.
So, to get flowering all year round in your garden, how do you go about that?
If you go into a nursery every month and buy a plant in flower, you'll have flower in your garden all year round.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. It's fair enough to say that Athol's plant care has reaped huge rewards. In fact, some of his results have really surprised me. I'm loving how good your kangaroo paws look.
Yes, in winter I cut them right down to the ground, give them a good feed. I do feed them with chicken manure, which is you're not supposed to do, but as you can see the results, and that's why they're so nice and strong and healthy.
What I find is that more phosphorus-sensitive plants like Banksias and some of the grevilleas are things that you don't want to feed with something like chicken manure, but kangaroo paws, especially these tall varieties, they're the long-lived types in the garden, they absolutely thrive on a regular diet.
Yes, if you just give it a mild dose and do it more often instead of one heavy dose.
I have to say, you've got some stunning grevilleas in the garden.
Yes, people always think grevilleas as one thing, but there is so many different varieties of the grevillea. Like we've got the huge Baileyan over there, which as it gets older, the bottom of the leaf is a gold colour. It takes a while to flower, as it's coming into flower now, compared to the other grevilleas, which have completely different leaf again.
Whilst the front yard is a triumph of planting, the backyard is a triumph of planning. It's quite spectacular, your water feature.
Yes, I always like water in my garden. It's good feng shui. It's very tranquil and very peaceful.
And you've transformed this whole backyard completely.
There wasn't a plant in the garden. The clothesline was in the middle of the garden.
And there's nothing bigger than those gardenia flowers. They're magnificent.
It's one of my favourites. I come from South Africa, and every garden has to have a gardenia.
Now that's particularly large flowered variety.
Yes, that's Professor Pucci. That is the large flowering one, also with a bigger leaf and a bigger grower.
And what's the secret to making them flower that well and avoid those yellow leaves that they often get?
Gardenias getting the yellow leaves, there's two things. One is extreme temperatures from cold to hot. The other one is magnesium deficiency. So a bit of Epsom salts will do the trick.
Athol, it's remarkable what you've achieved in just 2 years. It's got to give hope to gardeners everywhere.
The garden means a lot to me. It's my baby. And not to be religious, but they say when you're into the earth, you're closer to heaven. And that's what I believe in. I'm halfway there.
That's the show for another week. Head to our website, Facebook or Instagram to catch up on all our stories. I'll see you next time.
With spring in full swing, I'm going to show you how you can fill your garden with new plants from seedlings raised in your home.
And this is one of the few spots in this garden that gets additional water. It's a pond that's been planted up for maximum habitat value. And it's got things like junca species and Bomea and Mebeldina. The frogs clearly love it, and I reckon it will be an absolute magnet for birds and lizards.
Spring is not just in the air, it's well and truly all around us. And it's definitely happening along the spring walk here in Sydney's Royal Botanic Garden.